Hello, I'm Susan Fluegel, and my presentation is going to be on flies. And flies are kind of the unsung heroes of pollination. No one really talks about flies a lot. No one really wants to think about flies unless they're putting up a fly strip. Definitely bees are the ones that usually are getting all the press. And then after bees, you're looking at butterflies. And even when people think of flies, they usually think of flies that look like bees. So first of all, I want you to think about something. What is a pollinator anyway? What is your first image when it comes to pollinator? And for most people, it's probably a honeybee, maybe a bumblebee. It might be a beautiful butterfly. Some of you like birds, you might think about hummingbirds. Usually the first picture or the first thing that comes to mind is not a fly. Now we do have alternate pollinators, including wasps, beetles, moths, birds, bats, and other animals. Even humans can be pollinators. Some parts of Japan, they use actually quite a few human pollinators. But what about the adorable little flies? So you can't even think about flies as being adorable, most of you, right? Flies have very, very poor PR. For most of the time, they are not talked about. No one thinks about them. But in truth, flies are responsible for about 30% of the world's pollination. They are second only to bees. So they are a very, very important part of the pollination workflow. So why are flies such awesome pollinators? First of all, they live everywhere on Earth. There is no place on Earth, basically, that flies don't inhabit. Second, they can fly, they can pollinate in adverse conditions like high winds, cold Arctic temperatures. Most of the pollinators in Arctic and Antarctic temperate environments are actually flies, midges, some of the other from the diphtheria family. Over half, which is about 71%, or 71 of the 150 families of flies feed from flowers. So flies are associated with flowers, especially adult flies. They're often feeding from flowers. They're often going from flower to flower and able to spread pollen. So you might ask, why? Why aren't flies more well known? Well, for one thing, a lot of times when people see a fly on a plant, you don't really think much about it, right? When you see a bumblebee, you immediately think, oh, there goes that busy bee pollinating, my plant, or maybe think about honey. But when people see a fly, you're like, ew, it's spreading germs. In fact, the flies are the primary pollinators of most early season blooming flowers. And right about now, if you see something on a plant, it's most likely to be a fly. They pollinate over 550 flowering plants and over 100 of our cultivated crops around the globe, including things like pears, apples, strawberries, all of the things like raspberries, blackberries, roses, chili peppers, black pepper, fennel. A lot of your herbs are pollinated by flies, onions, carrots, and many more. So as I've kind of been talking about, why don't flies get more of the love? First of all, negative propaganda. Bees claim all the credit. And in fact, bees get the credit for the fly mimics. So a lot of flies that pollinate plants look a lot like bees. So when they're on a plant and you see it, automatically a lot of people's mind, especially people aren't in entomology or aren't avid observers of nature, will think there's a bee. It's black, it's yellow, it's got a stripe on it. And in fact, it's probably one of the fly mimics. So bees get all their credit. Then we got dung and carrion flies. They get all the press. When people are thinking about flies, think about annoying flies flying around a pile of poop or flying around a cairn. They're not thinking about flies flitting around on flowers. Also, most people associate flies with dirt, death, and disease. So they don't have that mental association. If you say to someone, fly, they wouldn't say pollinator. Well, maybe I would, but most people wouldn't. Flies also lack the cuteness of bumblebees, a lot of them, besides the bee mimics. A lot of they're furry, they're hairy. This one in the picture I have here is pretty cute. By the way, all the photos on this are pictures I have taken of different flies. There's a few bees and other things in here just for comparison, but they're mostly flies and bee mimics have been taken on a pollinator plot that I had right outside. It's right in the Palouse area here, is actually right outside Colfax on my mom's farm. So these are local flies. There is a total lack of research just on flies and pollination. I mean, there are a few papers, but nothing like you see with bees at all, or wild bees or solitary bees or any kind of the bees. So flies are kind of suffering from a lack of press because they don't get a lot of research. And what research there is concentrates only on a very few fly families, mostly the bee mimics like hoverflies and bee flies. Flies also don't take pollinating quite as seriously as the bee do. So the bees are very, very dedicated to their job. You know, they are out there, they are focused, they are going to your plant, they are getting that pollen, they are spraying it around, they're getting some nectar, they're bringing it back to the hive. Flies are like, oh, hey, there's a flower, might land over there. And so they are more lackadaisical about their pollinating. They don't take it near seriously. Flies in commercial pollinator use. Now we have a lot of flies that are, then they're starting to develop commercial fly pollination. Flies, first of all, like I said before, they contribute to the pollination of over 70% of our food crops. And they're already used commercially to pollinate things like onions, chives, carrots, strawberries, and blackberries. So they've been researched as a new crop managed pollination system. One is called Polyfly, and this company breeds a gold fly, which is a hoverfly, for use in closed agricultural systems like tunnels and greenhouses. Now, they breed them and then people can buy them in boxes and actually just release them. Now, there's a lot of problems when you're using bees or even bumblebees in a greenhouse situation that these flies can avoid. Flies are a lot hardier, like I said, they're more adaptable. They don't mind being in the greenhouse. You have a lot. So these flies can do the jobs that bees can't. Plus, if you have a closed system, you have to bring things in. You're not going to have bees coming from outside. It's kind of nice to put a hardy insect in there that can do the job. They also found that there's different types of chemicals and pheromones that you can do spray on the plants that help those flies focus a little more. It's like ADD medicine for flies. It kind of focuses them in right on the bloom that you want them to. Flies also work in synergy with bees when they're pollinating. The bees are more efficient when they see the fly. So bees, like I said, are a little busy and overachievers. So when they see something else competing with them, they will actually feel more compelled to pollinate quicker. Now, other flies, one of the main types of flies, and I mentioned this already, that pollinate is called the hoverfly, the Cypridae. They're also known as fireflies. They visit over 72% of global food crops and over 70% of wildflowers. The adults of these flies feed pretty exclusively from nectar and pollen. The larvae are really cool because they provide a lot of ecological services. They're biocontrol on pests, they clean up waste, they recycle vegetation. Some of them are some of those rat-tailed fly larvae that you see in water that actually help with water filtration of dirty or contaminated water. And then they found that adding hoverflies to cages of flowering strawberries could actually increase their fruit yield by over 70%. And this is not just yield, but it's also size, shape, flavor of the strawberry is improved by adding flies. Blowflies, if you talk about flies having negative image, I think that blowflies are one of the ones that, you see a fly, pretty much if you see one of these, your first impulse a lot of times is to see where the fly swatter is. But they visit over 30% of crops. These flies are usually metallic blue or green with hair-like bristles. Now, their larvae, they did study in Great Britain, and they found the larvae of these blowflies eat about 3 to 10 trillion aphids. So now that you know that, are these flies looking a little more friendly to you for your farm or yard? The interesting thing about blowflies is they're used to pollinate mangoes in different places. In California and also in Australia, in particular, Australia, because they're known for doing things a little tough. They actually put out dead carcasses in their mango groves to help attract the blowflies. The flowers are self-pollinating, but cross-pollination does definitely increase the yield of the mangoes. Another example, Mexican avocados are pollinated by the large green blowfly. This one's a lot cuter. This is a bee fly. You see them around here all the time. I really like this little guy. They're often mistaken for bees. They're really cute and fuzzy. The adults feed exclusively from nectar and pollen. Some species have flower color preferences of these bee flies. In this case, they looked in New Zealand. They have two different species of bee flies that they found. One liked orange flowers, the other liked white flowers. And floral bloom color in an area corresponded with the fly species in that area and their color preference. So they have obviously developed in synergy with each other. Another thing you can think chocolate are flies for is chocolate. So you have midges are actually what pollinate the cocaya tree flowers. These flowers are really oddly shaped flowers. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of this because they don't grow here in Idaho or Washington, which is kind of sad for those of us who would love to be able to grow chocolate. But the flower design of the flower makes bee pollination impossible. Usually 10 to 20% of these flowers are pollinated in the wild. However, under intense cultivation, the pollination rate is only 0.03%. And this is because intense cultivation, they strip all the surrounding trees. In nature, the plant likes to grow under the shade. They strip all this away and there's no place for the midges to live. So basically they're destroying a habitat of the midges. Having sustainable chocolate companies actually buy from places where they have a more sustainable harvesting of the trees or grow in a more natural environment, and you have the midges that help pollinate. Non-biting midges, another kind of midge, is some of the most important pollinators in the Arctic. So in Arctic insects, including these midges, can supercool themselves by various methods. This means they can effectively be frozen and then come back to life. Usually when things are frozen, it's not the freezing that kills them, it's the unthawing. When you unthaw, the water crystals actually destroy a lot of things in the animal or the insect or the plant. But so plants, insects, and even some animals have developed antifreeze, natural antifreezes, different chemicals and sometimes different sugar concentrations in the blood, which either can build up or are already there. And they allow things to stay just super cool without forming these ice crystals, is basically. And they can remain unfrozen even in the extreme temperatures of the Arctic. In this case, almost 80 Fahrenheit, you can see insects that are remaining fine and unfrozen. Now, flies, just like other insects, can have flower colors that they like the best. So they found out that hoverflies have 4 photoreceptors in their eyes. For comparison, humans and bees only have 3. Due to the extra photoreceptor, the flies prefer the longer wavelength colors like yellow. Bees, in contrast, actually like longer wavelengths like blue. This is just a generalized statement. You will see flies feeding all different colors. And they found out that flies can learn to feed on different colored plants if they have like good nectar sources or good pollen sources. So flies will definitely can learn, and adult flies can kind of adjust their behavior accordingly, which is sort of nice to know. Flower color can also change to exploit different pollinators in different seasons. So there's an alpine flower. It has both blue and white flowers on the same plant. And what they found is that the blowflies were more effective and efficient at pollinating the white flowers. The bees were more effective at pollinating blue flowers. What they saw is that flower color would change throughout the season. In the early parts of the season, where there's more flies flying and you don't see a lot of bees, you actually saw more white flowers. And these were being pollinated more effectively. As the season progressed, in the middle of the year, when it got warmer and you had more bees who were more efficient, the flower color turned to blue. So the color of the blooms changed throughout the season due to the pollinator. So we're coming to which one, team fly or team bee? So let's look at the advantages and disadvantages of each of these. First, flies breed faster than bees. No question, everyone who knows flies knows how fast they can breed. Flies need less energy and they're more adaptable. So they can fly around, they can fly at colder temperatures because they don't need the energy to warm up like a bee or a bumblebee does. Flies can live in harsher environments. They forage earlier and later, so they're around more often. They disperse pollen over a wider area, partially because flies can pollinate for very long. They can actually migrate really long distances, which is kind of unusual, which you don't see with bees. And fly larvae can be really important predators. So if you have an aphid problem, encouraging some of these flies might be a good thing. Now, let's look at the bees. Bees are more focused and they are much more type A than a fly. Flies will meander around, they get bored, they go to a different flower, but bees will like focus on that crop. They're definitely overachievers. They don't need any bribes. You might need to use a pheromone lure with a fly to get this focus on a crop, but you don't need to do that with a bee. Bees are much more likely to respond to flowering crop cover. So if you have a large expanse of flowering plants, a bee is much more likely to respond to that, where a fly might, like I said, fly off somewhere else because it's got something else to do somewhere else. Bees pollinate more than flies, they're more efficient. And also, hey, they make honey, which is great. How can you not like that? Plus, just face it, bees are pretty cute, though there's some cute flies too, so call that a wash. Now you might be wondering now, wow, you convinced me, flies are cool. How can I get some to go to my farm? Well, basically it's the same thing you do to get any other pollinator. If you have unmowed edges and ditches, you got more flies. One study found 21% more fly diversity, no matter what the farm management style. They looked at both conventional and organic farms, and they found that both had a lot more fly diversity when they left parts of the farm unmowed, so they would have more floral. So basically having more floral resources, more flowers available. Plant more white, yellow, orange, and red flowers to attract the flies. And I will tell you from my personal experience, Shasta daisies will attract all the flies to your place. They love Shasta daisies. I will also tell you from my personal experience that Shasta daisies smell an awful lot like dog poop sometimes. It depends on the variety. So do not plant the Shasta daisies where they underneath an open window, where you have a floral smell garden. They might want to be in the corner. They're still good plants and they do attract a lot of pollinators. Also from my experience around here is that red, yellow, and white yarrow also attracts quite a lot of flies. I saw flies go into a lot of different flowers when I was doing pollinator experiments, but the Shasta was by far the winner of the flies. All the flies loved it. Little ones, big ones, blowflies, the serpidae, everything. Make sure there's access to water, which is a good thing with any pollinator, and use some sort of mixed planting system to create different micro habits. So flies, like solitary bees, responded very positively to having things like flowering herbs, flowering weeds in field margins, in ditches and other areas. And you see an increase in the number due to that. Also be really careful with any insecticide use around any pollinators. None is definitely best with that. So in summary, flies are the unrecognized contributors to pollination. They work in synergy with the bees. Many flies share the same physical and behavioral traits that make bees effective pollinators. They got furry long bodies. They hang around the flower for a while doing who knows what, spreading around pollen, socializing, checking out stuff. This leads to more effective pollination of the plant. So I challenge each and every one of you, be different. Everybody wants to start a pollinator garden to attract butterflies or bees or hummingbirds. Be the first one in your area to start your own fly garden. Thank you.